side, I see the born, of no return. Just ahead now, can't you see we're rushing for the end? I see the point of no return. Now see the point of no return. It's just ahead.
Well, good evening. It's Monday again, June 2nd, 2014, and yeah, I wimped out and took last week off. Believe it or not, I had a very good excuse. My dear daughter got married last weekend. I'm, crossing my fingers and hoping that my daughter and her new husband beat the odds. It is kind of scary. I know how many marriages here in the United States end in divorce for one reason or another. It's just you look at the statistics, and sometimes you wonder why folks even bother. It's kind of scary. I think the last statistics I saw said something like 56% of marriages in the United States these days end in divorce. Usually in the first 5 years. And what is the biggest reason people say they divorce? Money. Money. Most young couples who get married end up divorcing over money. I'm not sure if that's, a sign of the times or what, but, just one of those ugly statistics that you got to be a little concerned about. Anyway, I'm sure my daughter and her new husband will beat the odds. I mean, shoot, I've been married to my first wife now for, I think, going on 40 years. I keep referring to her as my first wife, just to keep her in line. Yeah, yeah. And if you believe that, I got this bridge for sale. That anyway, I hope everybody's in good spirits. It has been a lot going on in the past couple of weeks, and I tell you, I was real tempted to, try to force a session last week, because man, there's a lot of stuff in the news last week that just absolutely pissed me off. But had family business I had to take care of, so I was not able to do the broadcast last week. So we're going to try and catch up on those items in the news this past week that just really, really, really pissed me off. Now, although it's not being reported here in the United States, in what we refer to as the complacent media or mainstream media or bought and paid for, however you wish to describe them, but those dinosaurs over at CNN, MSNBC, and whoever else they are, don't seem to care much for reporting on both sides of the issue in Ukraine. Now, this thing in Ukraine started not too long ago when what appears to have been a coup took place that ejected the elected government. Okay, that in and of itself, I guess, isn't so terribly shocking. I mean, the government that was running Ukraine was basically a Russian puppet regime. The country was being run for the benefit of a handful of oligarchs who became fabulously wealthy on the largesse of the Ukrainian people. So looking at it, you could easily understand why Ukrainians might want to throw those bums out. They were not nice people, okay? I mean, they were not nice people. So there was a coup, and a new government took over. Well, now they've got a hand-picked group of oligarchs running Ukraine. The only difference is they're EU-US leaning oligarchs. So, you know, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. No real difference. The people in Western Ukraine identify loosely with Europe. The people in Eastern Ukraine identify mostly with Russia. So you got kind of a split here. Now, folks in Eastern Ukraine looked at these guys who took charge in the West. You know, the government in Kiev that the United States and the EU immediately rushed to recognize, saying, you know, even though this was a coup, you know, they were like, oh, yes, these are our buddies, these are good guys, we recognize them as the legal government of Ukraine. Folks in the East didn't care much for them. They said, look, you know, these guys are a bunch of freaking neo-Nazis. We didn't elect them. We want nothing to do with them. We want to go our own way. So there was a separatist movement organized in eastern Ukraine. I'm sure everybody's aware that Crimea early on split off with some coaxing from Russia. Not terribly surprising, because Russia has significant technical and tactical investments in Crimea. So it wasn't that big a surprise that with a government now in charge of Ukraine that was in many ways openly hostile to Russia, that Russia would make sure that its strategic interests in Ukraine were protected. So Crimea split off from Ukraine, was independent for, I guess, about an hour before they petitioned to become part of Russia. Okay. That did not please the U.S. and EU interests, but, you know, they seemed ready to kind of let that one pass, okay? I think they were ready to give Russia a pass on that one. But now, separatist movements that are quite vocal and apparently willing to take up arms to enforce their separatist desires are moving to separate from Kiev physically. I mean, I don't know that the intensity of the fighting qualifies it as a civil war yet, but I think a total of 1,000 people or more have died in this back and forth between Kiev and the eastern portion of Ukraine. More than 1,000 people. I don't know. Does that qualify as a civil war? Just recently, it appears that Kiev has chosen to escalate the issue. They're now not just running helicopter gunships into eastern Ukraine, they are running fighter bombers into Ukraine, and they are quite literally bombing their countrymen in the east for daring to express the desire to separate. Now, eastern Ukraine's population is not terribly well armed. I mean, the picture of this, some would say he's a freedom fighter. I'm sure the fellows in western Ukraine would refer to this fellow as a terrorist, a domestic terrorist. It appears he's armed with a double-barrel shotgun. It's a good shotgun. It looks like it might be one of those fancy 10 gauges that's popular in Eastern Europe. So yeah, it's a good shotgun. But it's not the type of thing that would be effective in bringing down a helicopter gunship or, God forbid, a fighter bomber. More recently, it appears that Russia has seen to it that at least a small number of more sophisticated weapons, including shoulder-launched anti-aircraft missiles, apparently Russia is making sure that some of that kind of weapon gets into the hands of the separatists in eastern Ukraine. Now, there's a couple things to consider here. First of all, at what point does this become what we would all refer to as a civil war? Some are jumping the gun already and saying, this is not just, quelling a disturbance or a police action on the part of Kiev. This is an all-out civil war. Others kind of hold back on it and say, well, it's not, the fighting's not really reached the intensity of an all-out civil war. Right now, what we got here is we got some violent insurgents that Western Ukraine needs to put down, and they may have to declare martial law in that area to enforce their will. Okay. The other thing that we kind of have to keep in the back of our mind is that Russia has stated that they will not tolerate Western Ukraine going in and just massacring ethnic Russian populations in eastern Ukraine. So at what point is the fighting intense enough that Russia will see fit to honor its threat to join in the fighting? A lot to think about there. Over the weekend, fighter bombers hit a town called Lugansk. I hope I said that right. Pardon me, any Ukrainians out there. It's kind of hard for a Southern boy to pronounce Eastern European names. I'm doing the best I can. Please pardon me if I pronounce that incorrectly. But it appears that they were going after a what they would consider an insurgent stronghold. Basically, the local militia had set up kind of a base in an office building there, a government office building, and it appears they went after that group and apparently failed to get them, but they did manage to kill a handful of civilians, about 5-6 civilians. There's also indication that an orphanage in a nearby town in eastern Ukraine was shelled. So, it appears that Kiev is targeting the civilian population. It does not appear that they can effectively target the separatist fighters. So it appears that their tactic is to cause enough damage, enough misery to the civilian population that the civilian population will stand up and demand order. It's a common tactic, okay? In all disputes that reach this level where shooting starts, it's the civilian population that's going to suffer. And that's what's going on in Ukraine right now. The guys that are out there that are actively fighting the Ukrainian army, coming in and setting up strongholds in eastern Ukraine, they're pretty hard to target. They're fighting a guerrilla action. They're fast on their feet. They move around a lot. These guys do not have a lot of heavy equipment that they have to deal with. They're fighting against Western Ukraine much the same way that the North Vietnamese fought the United States during the Vietnam War. It is a guerrilla action that they're taking. Consequently, they're kind of hard to target specifically. So the Kiev government is using the same type of tactic that the United States used in Vietnam. Make the civilian population suffer so much that the civilian population will demand an end to hostilities, even if it means Kiev wins. So that's one to keep an eye on. It's one to be concerned about. You know, I don't have any special insights on this. I wish I did. I've heard a lot of the arguments on both sides. Unfortunately, here in the United States, about the only side we get is Kiev, good. Eastern Ukraine, bad. Kiev, good. Eastern Ukraine, bad. And, you know, it's difficult to sift through all the opinions on the opposing side. Some of these people purport to be expert in this field. But, you know, one thing you've always got to remember is that everybody who reports on this type of thing has some kind of axe to grind. They got some kind of spin they're going to put on this material. It would be real nice if we could get clear, objective reporting. Right now, what we're getting out of the United States press is pap, absolute garbage. Okay, and what we're getting out of the other side, typically the Russia Todays, and is the Russian slant on what's going on, which of course is, you know, probably no more accurate than what's coming out of American media. Chances are the truth is somewhere in between, and you're just going to have to take a look at the situation, consider, and make up your own damn mind. You know, I've got opinions on it, but, you know, my opinion and $5 get you a cup of coffee at that fancy yuppie coffee place. Also in the news, movers and shakers, big shots and bankers and financiers and CEOs of major corporations have once again gathered in what is commonly referred to in alternative media as Bilderberg. Yeah. Got its name from, you know, the hotel that they stayed at, I guess back in the 50s or something like that. For whatever reason it stuck. I'm not sure what these guys call themselves. Their story is, hey, you know, we're just a bunch of boys getting together. You know, it's a gentleman's social club. You know, we're just getting together to smoke some cigars, watch some stag films, you know, shoot the breeze. You know, this, you know, there's nothing diabolical or evil about we're, you know, just getting together for an annual meeting, you know, chase some women, drink some booze, smoke some cigars. You know, no big deal. Yeah. Historically, though, the few times we have managed to see clear-cut agendas of what was discussed at Bilderberg, we got an idea of, you know, that these fellows are actually planning events in the future that would further their mutual interests. Now, gee, a bunch of the richest folks in the world get together for a meeting. You really think they're going to sit around drinking cognac, smoking cigars, you know, talking trash to each other about their exploits with, you know, weak women and strong whiskey? Probably not. Probably not. Now, some of the discussions that we're told are on the agenda this time around was nuclear war, the Ukraine situation, how to reorganize the Middle East, and what to do about this clown running the United States, is this Obama guy. Now, as usual, security was pretty tight. Any reporters that wanted to get in and try to cover this event were, you know, basically met with shall we say, somewhat less than lethal force, but they were definitely turned away. Some of the best reporting on Bilderberg that I've seen is coming out of InfoWars. Keep in mind, I'm not a big fan of Alex Jones, but he's got a couple of pretty classy reporters affiliated with his organization that are attending Bilderberg, and some of the coverage that they've provided, I think, is better than average. By the way, protesters at Bilderberg this year were given their very own pen, and the cops outnumbered the protesters about 3-1. They were kept well away from the building where the meeting was held in what is referred to as a free speech zone. Thank you, Copenhagen, for giving us this interesting view into how free speech works in your nation. I'm hearing the music in the background, so I'm going to have to slide out of here for a moment while the network sells some goods. I'll be back right after these important commercial announcements. Alrighty, and we're back from our break. Talk a little bit about Bilderberg, and this is from an article by a fellow named Paul Joseph Watson. He's a journalist with InfoWars. Let me read you just a little bit of this. Protesters who briefly entered the Marriott Hotel, this is in Copenhagen, after the Bilderberg Group conference had finished. Okay, the conference is done with. All the attendees are gone. Were interrogated by police and had their names taken, exemplifying the irrational level of secrecy surrounding the confab. Late yesterday afternoon at around 5:30 p.m., after all the Bilderberg Group attendees, organizers, and police had left the Marriott in Copenhagen, a group of activists that had been situated across the street attempted to enter the hotel to get a drink at the bar. When the activists were denied entry by hotel security staff, they immediately complied, left the building, and began filming outside. Just after they left, a van full of police had rolled up, who then made a beeline for the activists, taking down everyone's ID numbers, addresses in Copenhagen, Now, is this an objective report? Hardly. I mean, this fellow Watson in InfoWars definitely has an axe to grind. But I think from his point of view, the reporting is accurate. I have no doubt but that these people were denied access to a public hotel bar. I have in the back of my mind that they were probably there to do a little bit more than just get a drink, but, you know, that's one man's opinion. The fact that the police descended on them, well, there's an old saying that the flak is always heaviest when you're right over the target. So, yeah, another year at Bilderberg. Now, you know, a couple years ago, the Bilderberg folks descended on Fairfax County, Virginia, very near where I live. And, yeah, I was out there, if for no other reason than to add my body to the body count that they were taking pictures of. Now, when I went to that particular Bilderberg protest, I would take a wild guess that there were probably 2,000, maybe 3,000 people out there protesting. There were some well-known groups there. I think Oath Keepers was there. A couple other well-known groups of people participated in that protest. My understanding that this year in Copenhagen, the number of protesters observable was fairly small. Might have been as few as 100, might have been as many as 500. Needless to say, the turnout for protests at this year's Bilderberg conference, I think, was somewhat disappointing to many people. It seemed that there was probably as many alternative press there attempting to do legitimate coverage of the event than there were protesters actively engaging in protesting the meeting. What's the significance of that? I'm not really sure. But that's the facts as I can sift them out. You're going to have to make up your own damn mind. So police in Copenhagen don't like Bilderberg protesters. Okay, well, you know. Police here in the United States apparently don't like toddlers. It was reported just today that a SWAT team making one of these unannounced dynamic entries, as they like to refer to it. I call it a breaking and entering. Apparently they wanted to get these people off base, so the Georgia SWAT team tosses a flashbang grenade in just before they do their dynamic entry. Well, the flashbang grenade lands in a toddler's playpen and has seriously injured a toddler. I mean, this kid has lost the use of one of its lungs. It's in intensive care. There is, you know, right now, verdict's out. Nobody knows whether this child's going to live or die. The interesting thing is the people whose child was injured in this dynamic entry were not the subjects of this home invasion. These were some folks who were down and out and had made arrangements to, you know, kind of stay with a friend. Now, they knew this friend was a little shady, but, you know, best information they had was that, you know, he'd gotten his life back on track and he was doing his best to be an upstanding citizen. And they needed a place to stay, and he was offering. So, you know, they were staying with this guy for a little while. Now, once they got to Georgia, you know, they figured this guy was, you know, not really somebody that they wanted to hang out with. So they were making arrangements to move back north to try to connect with gigs or something. But, you know, they were just temporary residents in this home. Apparently, the SWAT team thought they had some damn good reason to perform this dynamic entry. But the fact that a toddler is now in a medically induced coma, on the edge, whether or not it's going to survive, even if the child does survive, will have permanent injuries. This is just another indication that this tactic of maximum force that our militarized police have been employing with impunity here in the United States may not be the right way to go. I mean, you know, if you really, really think that we did not have criminals back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, if you really think there were no criminals back in those days, you best rethink. If you really think there were no drug dealers back in those days, you best rethink. If you really, really think there were no really, really, really bad guys out there back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, what rock have you been living under? Okay, there have always been some bad people in the United States. Most of us are really pretty easygoing, but yeah, you know, we've always had our share of bad guys here in the United States. Why is it now, all of a sudden, we need these no-knock home invasions at odd hours of the day? I mean, back in the old days, you know, the detectives used to knock on the door. They had a couple, you know, backup cops behind them. You know, if something started, you know, they were prepared to do something. But, you know, they knock on the door. Hey, you know, police, I got a warrant. You're under arrest. Come out with your hands up. It seems like just a couple of decades ago, these things were handled. They were handled in a business-like manner, and the bad guys usually got arrested. Probably as many of them got arrested as do nowadays. But there was a whole hell of a lot less collateral damage and a lot less innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. It is a fact in the United States today that since 9/11, 2001, 3 times as many Americans have been killed by police as were killed by the terrorists on 9/11. Obviously, we're doing something wrong. I'm hearing the music in the background. I'm going to have to step out for a moment and let the studio sell some products. I'll be back in just a moment. Alrighty, we're back from our last break of the evening. Well, I got a lot of news here to get wrapped up on in the last 10, 12 minutes I've got tonight. Just before we left for that break, I was talking about this, dynamic entry, home invasion. Dynamic entry, home invasion. We're hearing reports from all over the country about, these out-of-control police officers hopped up on steroids or whatever, invading the wrong homes, shooting people's dogs. There have been many, way too many, innocent civilians shot in these things. Now, if you're the average homeowner, you got to be a little bit concerned. I mean, you don't care if that guy coming through your front door at 2 a.m. wearing a Darth Vader outfit is doing a dynamic entry or a home invasion. Either way, your life, your property is on the line. You may wind up shot. You may wind up dead. Your dog could wind up shot and or dead. You got a right to be a little concerned. Well, a Georgia woman, this was just reported yesterday. Let's see, on May 29th, 3 people allegedly approached an East Point, Georgia apartment posing as police officers. See those, funny-looking polyester uniforms and the tin-plated badge that these guys wear? You can get those at a surplus store cheap. Anybody who really wants to dress up in that clown costume can do it if they so desire. Posing as police officers, intending to force their way inside when the woman inside the apartment shot one of the would-be invaders. Now, luckily for this woman, this time the invaders were just posing as police. So, she's getting a pat on the back and a good solid citizen award for shooting the bad guys who just happened to be wearing police uniforms. Okay? According to WSB-TV2, the renter cracked the door to take a look outside, and that's when police say the 3 tried to push their way inside. Police said that one of the suspects raised a handgun, but the woman fired first, grazing one attacker on the head and the backside. Shot him where he sits down. The suspects fled, but the wounded one was apprehended. Neighbors say there have been a lot of break-ins in the apartments recently, and they are glad the renter had a gun with her with which to protect herself. Now, as more and more reports come in of overzealous, steroid-popping cops acting like they were military in Fallujah, as more and more reports of this nonsense comes out, you're going to hear more and more reports of police being met with deadly force. The media is going to paint anybody who stands up to these home invaders as being crazed white guys carrying Bibles and guns, and they're going to be poster children for gun control. All right? I mean, that is the way the media paints people who defend themselves from a home invasion or dynamic entry. I don't care what you call it, but when you come through my front door at 2 o'clock in the morning dressed up like Darth Vader, you should expect to be met with force. I'm sorry, it's nothing personal. I don't want to shoot a cop. I don't really want to shoot anybody. But you come through my door at 2 a.m. looking for trouble, you're going to find it. How's the economy where you are? Huh? What about that? You know? You haven't noticed any inflation, right? You know, food's still the same price. You haven't noticed that gasoline's gone up about 10% in the last couple months. You know, it's interesting. I understand that gasoline sales in the United States are kind of at an all-time low. But for some reason, the price is up 10%. Supply and demand. All of a sudden, basic economics don't work anymore. How is it we're awash in gasoline, yet the price is still going up? How does that work? You know, I kind of thought in a free market economy like we're supposed to have, you know, if a guy's got a whole lot of something and nobody's buying it, what he usually does is he drops the price on it a little bit to make it more attractive so more people will buy his merchandise. Food, you know, have you noticed what's happened with the price of food? You know, it seems like, you know, basics that you buy every day, you know, bacon and eggs and bread and milk, you know, the stuff that everybody consumes all the time, through the roof. Up maybe, you know, 20% recently. But, you know, your pay has kept pace, right? So, you know, as food goes up 20% and gasoline goes up 10%, and wait until you see what Obama's new regulations concerning electric generation, wait until you see what that's going to do to your electric bill. But, you know, if electric goes up 10, 15, 20%, I'm sure that, you know, you'll get a little extra something in your paycheck, right? You'll be making a little bit more money, so you'll at least be able to keep up with inflation, right? Right? I don't know about you. That ain't happening here. It seems my outgo is not quite keeping up with my income, or my income is not quite keeping up with my outgo. Whatever. How's it working for you? Remember a television show called The Waltons? Remember that? You know, I used to watch a lot of TV, and one of the shows I kind of enjoyed watching was The Waltons. You know, it was about a family during the Depression. And you had, you know, in this depiction of life in Depression age United States, you had 3 generations living under the same roof. You know, you had grandma and grandpa, you had, you know, dad and his wife, and you had all the kids. You know, you had 3 generations living under one roof. And that was the way people lived here in the United States as recently as the 1950s and 60s. But, you know, starting in the 50s and becoming more common as we got into the 70s, it seemed it became more normal for single-generational households. So, you know, grandma and grandpa, you know, they were in a nursing home somewhere. Maybe you visited them, you know, twice a year or whatever. Brought them, you know, a present on Christmas and let them be attended by their attendants and whatever. And, you know, the kids, well, you know, you booted them out the door at 18, 19 years old when they went off to college, and right after college they'd get a job, and, you know, they'd come home on Christmas, you know, maybe mom and dad get a kiss on the cheek at Christmas time, And the idea of the multi-generational household went the way of the dinosaur. Well, it's back. This report out just today. A third of America's 18 to 34-year-olds now live with their parents. Increasing numbers of young Americans are heading to college where they are racking up in debt to pay for rapidly increasing tuition costs. Tuition costs are ridiculous nowadays. It's absolutely ridiculous. It's not at all uncommon for these kids to come out of 4 years of college and be $50,000 in debt. I remember, when I was going to school, it cost you maybe $800 or $1,000 a year. So if you finance your whole college education, you might be in debt maybe $4,000. But most of us back in those days were paying cash. We didn't finance our college degrees. Nowadays, you have to. It's like taking out a mortgage. This, in turn, has led to increasing delinquency rates for student loan borrowers. You betcha. And the only way they can make it is to stay home with mom and dad. Here's an interesting one. Former president, I got to rush through these last couple because I'm running out of time. This was just out today. The CIA plotted to assassinate Richard Nixon. Now, look, there's a lot of people say Lyndon Johnson and the CIA was all wrapped up in, along with some other interested parties. The mafia was probably involved, but, a lot of people say it was, Lyndon Johnson, the CIA, and a number of other interested parties that did Kennedy in. Okay, and there's a new book out by a fellow named Stone that, basically backs that up with his research. Well, apparently this guy Stone has just recently come out saying that, Nixon and his pressuring of the CIA over what the hell happened to Kennedy and why put Nixon on the list. On his way out, Nixon basically said, okay, look, you better give me a pardon, Mr. Ford, or I'll talk about how you were the one who modified the autopsy photos. Jerry Ford? Jerry Ford? The guy was such a dolt, he couldn't even leave an airplane without cracking his skull. But apparently, okay. Stone. Explosive book. Nixon's Secrets. The Truth About Watergate and the Pardon. Might be an interesting read. You can bet I'm going to be looking at it. Last but not least, look, there's a lot being reported, and frankly, for most, this is the top story. This fella, Bowe Bergdahl, apparently, depending on who you are, fell behind in a mission, got captured by the Taliban, held for 5 years. Some say he walked off the job into the desert, never to be seen again. Others say he was planted as a covert spy amongst the Taliban. Well, whatever. Here again, we're hearing so many different stories, it's easy to get confused. I'm not sure we will know for quite some time to come what the real story about this guy, Bowe Bergdahl, was all about. Whether he was a deserter, whether he just happened to fall behind in a mission and get captured by the Taliban, or whether he was planted amongst the Taliban as an intelligence agent. Maybe one of these days we'll know for sure. But he is home, and 5 supposed important Taliban guys were traded for his release. What do you think of that one? Make up your own mind. I'm out of here. Y'all have a good evening. We'll talk to you again next week. Good night, all.
What calling out to you. Won't you turn around? Oh, I'm calling out to you. Won't you turn, won't you